February 2024. Phil Spencer, the soft-spoken architect of Microsoft's gaming division, sat in a studio chair to deliver a message that felt like a funeral oration for the console wars. For 20 years, the rules of the industry were carved in stone. You build a plastic box, you lock your best games inside it, and you starve the competition of oxygen. But Spencer's broadcast signalled the end of that era. He announced that Xbox's crown jewels were going to the enemy. Titles that were once the reason to buy an Xbox were being ported to the PlayStation 5. To the casual observer, it looked like a white flag. To the financial analysts in Redmond, it was a tactical nuke. Microsoft has spent the last decade morphing from a hardware underdog into a $3 trillion software leviathan that treats the traditional console market like a playground it has outgrown. What started as a desperate attempt to fix the disastrous launch of the Xbox One has metastasized into an ecosystem-first strategy designed to decouple gaming from the hardware that defines it. They are no longer selling a box, they are selling a digital atmosphere. But beneath the talk of accessibility and reaching every player on the planet lies a ruthless predatory logic. By flooding the PlayStation with its own software, Microsoft isn't just seeking more revenue, it is Trojan horsing its way into Sony's living room, turning its rival into a glorified retail outlet for Microsoft content. This is the story of how Xbox is burning the old world down to ensure it owns whatever rises from the ashes. For nearly 3 decades, Sony's PlayStation has been the undisputed king of the high-end console market. Since the mid-90s, the Japanese giant has followed a predictable, profitable, and incredibly effective blueprint. Manufacture the best hardware, cultivate elite first-party studios like Naughty Dog and Santa Monica Studio, and sell $70 experiences that players cannot find anywhere else. It was a strategy built on prestige and exclusivity.
If you wanted to play God of War or The Last of Us, you had to pay the PlayStation tax. This model turned Sony into a global cultural powerhouse, but it also created a massive vulnerability. Sony is a hardware-dependent company in a world that is rapidly moving towards service-based platforms. Microsoft, by contrast, doesn't need to sell consoles to survive. While Sony's electronics division lives or dies by the margins on its silicon and the royalties from its storefront, Microsoft's gaming arm is backed by the bottomless treasury of a cloud computing titan. In 2022, Microsoft made a move that shattered the industry's equilibrium, announcing the $69 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard. It was the largest deal in tech history, a sum of money so vast it could have purchased entire industries. When the dust settled, Microsoft owned Call of Duty, the most lucrative annual entertainment property on Earth. This acquisition was the first major fracture in the PlayStation's foundation. For years, Sony had relied on Call of Duty to drive hardware sales and generate billions in third-party royalties. Suddenly, Microsoft held the leash of Sony's most important cash cow. While Microsoft signed a 10-year deal to keep the franchise on PlayStation, the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Sony went from a partner to a tenant, paying rent to its primary rival for the privilege of hosting the world's biggest game. But the real threat isn't just the ownership of content, it's the delivery mechanism. Enter Xbox Game Pass. Often described as the Netflix of gaming, Game Pass is Microsoft's play to replace the $70 purchase with a monthly subscription. It is an aggressive, loss-leading gamble designed to build a monopoly on player time. By offering hundreds of games, including new releases, for a small monthly fee, Microsoft is effectively devaluing the very product Sony relies on. Sony's business model depends on you spending $500 on a console and then $70 on a game.
Microsofts tell you that you don't need a console at all. You just need an internet connection and $15 a month. This creates a terrifying dilemma for PlayStation. If Sony tries to match Microsoft's subscription value, they cannibalize their own high-margin game sales. If they don't, they risk looking like an expensive relic of a bygone era. Microsoft is using its capital to force Sony into a race to the bottom, where only the company with the deepest pockets survives. It is a war of attrition, and Microsoft has the bigger silo. The new Xbox strategy of putting games on PlayStation is the final stage of this encirclement. By porting games like Sea of Thieves and Indiana Jones to the PS5, Microsoft is accomplishing two things at once. First, they are extracting pure profit from Sony's massive install base, effectively getting the PlayStation audience to subsidise the development of future Xbox titles. Second, they are eroding the very concept of the console exclusive. If you can get Xbox games on a PlayStation, but you can't get PlayStation games on an Xbox, the value proposition starts to tilt. Microsoft becomes the universal publisher, while Sony remains a walled garden that is slowly running out of water. Sony's reaction to this has been one of visible panic. In recent years, they have begun porting their own exclusives to PC, a move that would have been unthinkable under previous leadership. It is a desperate attempt to find new revenue streams as the costs of game development skyrocket. A modern PlayStation exclusive now costs upwards of $300 million to produce and 5 to 7 years to develop. At that price point, the traditional model of selling to a single hardware audience is becoming unsustainable. Sony is being squeezed between the rising costs of production and Microsoft's efforts to lower the market price of content. Furthermore, Microsoft's dominance in cloud infrastructure gives them a structural advantage that Sony cannot replicate.
Through Azure, Microsoft owns the pipes and servers that allow games to be streamed to phones, tablets, and smart TVs. Sony, lacking its own global cloud network, has been forced to sign a deal with Microsoft to use Azure for its own streaming services. This is the ultimate irony. Even when Sony tries to compete in the future of gaming, they end up paying their competitor for the infrastructure to do so. There is a darker, more cynical reality beneath this corporate chess match. The transition to a service-based, multi-platform industry threatens the very nature of gaming as an art form. When games are designed for a subscription service, the incentive shifts from making the best possible experience to making the most engaging one. We are seeing the rise of games as a service, titles designed to be played forever, filled with microtransactions and repetitive loops meant to keep the monthly sub active. Microsoft's strategy isn't just about winning a market, it's about reshaping that market into something more extractive and less stable. For PlayStation, the walls are closing in. They are currently leading in hardware sales, but hardware is a lagging indicator. The momentum has shifted toward the ecosystem as Microsoft integrates Xbox into every Windows PC, every mobile device via the cloud, and now even the rival's console. The traditional boundaries of the industry are dissolving. Sony is left defending a fort while Microsoft is busy buying the land the fort sits on. The risk for the consumer is just as high. A world where Microsoft succeeds in making hardware irrelevant is a world where one corporation holds the keys to the entire medium's library. We have seen what happens in the streaming world. Prices rise, content disappears due to licensing disputes, and the user owns nothing. By making Xbox an everywhere brand, Microsoft is positioning itself to be the sole gatekeeper of the digital playground. Sony's path forward is narrow.
They must double down on the one thing Microsoft cannot buy: prestige. Sony's brand is built on the idea that their games are the Oscars of the industry, unmatched in quality, narrative, and technical polish. But prestige is a fragile thing. If the financial pressure from Microsoft's subscription war forces Sony to cut budgets or rush releases, that aura of excellence will evaporate. Once the PlayStation becomes just another box to play the same games as everyone else, the reason for its existence disappears. We are witnessing a slow-motion demolition of the status quo. Microsoft isn't trying to beat Sony at their own game. They are simply making that game impossible to play. They are leveraging their status as a global tech titan to overwhelm a consumer electronics company that is still thinking in terms of units sold and retail shelf space. The new Xbox strategy isn't a retreat, it's an expansion. It is the realization that in the digital age, you don't need to destroy your enemy if you can simply make them part of your supply chain. As the lines between platforms continue to blur, the very idea of a PlayStation fan or an Xbox fan becomes a marketing ghost. We are entering an era of platform agnosticism, where the content is king, but the king is owned by a corporation that views art as data and players as recurring revenue streams. Sony has spent 30 years perfecting the console. Microsoft has spent the last 5 ensuring the console no longer matters. This is the cold, calculated reality of the new gaming landscape. It is no longer about which box has better graphics or a faster processor. It is a battle of financial endurance, cloud infrastructure, and the slow erosion of the competitor's identity. Microsoft is playing a game of 4D chess with a $3 trillion bank account, and Sony is increasingly looking like a grandmaster who brought a knife to a drone strike. The blue brand is still fighting for the crown, but the red brand is redesigning the throne. This is the story of the end of the console wars and the beginning of the Microsoft monopoly.